The law office smelled like expensive leather and old money, the kind of smell that made men like Connor Hayes feel like an intruder, even when they'd been invited. He sat in a high-backed chair that was too stiff, too polished, too everything he wasn't anymore. His canvas jacket, worn at the elbows and stained with oil from the garage where he'd been working part-time, looked like a costume from another world in this place. Beside him, Axel, a 5-year-old Belgian Malinois, with a coat of rich mahogany and black, sat perfectly still, ears rotating toward every sound. The dog's amber eyes tracked movement with the precision of a trained soldier, which he had been, which they both had been. Connor's older brother Marcus sat across the mahogany table, legs crossed, expensive suit pressed to perfection. His wife Vanessa perched beside him like a bird of prey in designer heels, her fingers glittering with rings Connor could never afford. Their lawyer, Gerald Finch, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a face that had forgotten how to smile, cleared his throat and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "Shall we begin?" Finch's voice was smooth as polished stone. Connor nodded once. Axel shifted slightly, pressing his shoulder against Connor's leg. The dog always knew when tension was building. Finch opened the folder with practiced precision. The last will and testament of Colonel Robert Hayes, dated November 14th of last year, Connor's grandfather. A man who'd raised him after Connor's parents died in a car accident when he was 8. A man who'd taught him to fish, to hunt, to survive. A man who'd understood what it meant to serve. Because he'd done 3 tours in Vietnam and came home carrying ghosts, Connor only later learned to recognize. Colonel Hayes had been the only family member who didn't look at Connor with disappointment after he came back from Afghanistan. The only one who understood why Connor couldn't sleep through the night. Why loud noises made him flinch. Why he needed Axel more than he needed most people. Finch continued, voice flat and administrative. "To my grandson, Marcus Hayes, I leave the family estate in Missoula, the investment portfolio managed by Clearwater Financial, and all liquid assets contained in the primary accounts." Marcus's expression didn't change, but Vanessa's lips curved into a smile so subtle it could have been carved from ice. Connor felt his chest tighten. He'd expected this. Of course he had. Marcus was the successful one, the corporate attorney, the one with the big house and the perfect family, the one who hadn't come home from war broken. "And to my grandson, Connor Hayes." The room went silent. Even the heating system seemed to stop humming. Finch paused, glancing up with an expression Connor couldn't quite read. "I leave the cabin on Frozen Ridge, property deed included, with all contents therein." Marcus scoffed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "The hunting shack? That place has been abandoned for 15 years. Vanessa laughed, a brittle sound. "How generous. A collapsing cabin in the middle of nowhere." Connor's jaw clenched. Axel's ears flattened slightly, picking up on his handler's rising tension. Finch continued, as if they hadn't spoken. "Additionally, I leave Connor my personal effects stored at the cabin, and this message." He slid a sealed envelope across the table. Connor stared at it. His name was written in his grandfather's shaky handwriting, the letters uneven from arthritis, but unmistakably his. Marcus leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Well, little brother, looks like you finally got what you deserve. A frozen shack, and whatever junk the old man was hoarding." "Marcus!" Connor's voice came out quieter than he intended. "What? You think he was hiding gold up there?" Marcus laughed. "Face it, Connor. Grandfather knew you couldn't handle real responsibility. You can barely hold down a job at an auto shop. What were you going to do with actual money? Drink it away? Waste it on that dog?" Axel growled, low, controlled, the sound of a weapon being unsheathed. Connor placed a hand on the dog's head. "Easy." Vanessa wrinkled her nose. "Really? Connor. Bringing that animal to a legal proceeding. It's embarrassing. Something inside Connor snapped. Not violently, not loudly, just a clean break, like ice cracking underfoot. He stood slowly, picking up the envelope. "We're done here," Marcus called after him. "Don't come crying to us when you're freezing in that dump. And don't expect a handout when you realize grandfather gave you nothing." Connor didn't turn around. He walked out of the office, Axel at his heel, and didn't look back. Outside, the cold hit him like a wall. Snow had started falling thick, heavy flakes that turned Billings into a blur of white and gray. Connor leaned against the brick wall, breathing hard, the envelope trembling in his hands. Axel pressed against his leg, warm and solid. The dog's presence was the only thing keeping Connor from spiraling into the dark place, where memories of explosions and gunfire waited. He opened the envelope with numb fingers. Inside was a single handwritten note. "Connor, they never understood you. They never understood me either. That's why I'm giving you what matters, not money, but truth. The cabin holds more than memories. Follow Axel. He'll know what to find. You're stronger than you think, stronger than they'll ever be. Grandfather." Connor read it 3 times, his throat tight. "Follow Axel." He looked down at the dog, who was staring up at him with those intelligent amber eyes. Connor exhaled, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Guess we're going to the mountains, buddy." Axel's tail wagged once. Just once, but it was enough. Connor's apartment. That evening, a 1-bedroom unit above a laundromat, the walls thin enough to hear every conversation, every footstep, every reminder that he was barely surviving. Connor sat on the edge of his worn couch, surrounded by everything he owned that mattered. A duffel bag stuffed with clothes, his grandfather's letter, a photograph of his platoon in Afghanistan, half of them now gone, and Axel's traveling gear, a harness, a collapsible water bowl, and the medical kit Connor kept for emergencies. On the coffee table sat $340 in cash. His last paycheck from the garage, minus rent he'd already paid for the month. It was everything. He'd called his landlord an hour ago and given notice. Told him he wouldn't be renewing the lease. The man had sounded relieved, one less tenant who paid late, and kept a military dog in a no-pets building. Connor picked up his phone and stared at the screen. No messages. No missed calls. Marcus hadn't reached out. Neither had Vanessa. Neither had anyone from the family. He wasn't surprised. Axel padded over, resting his chin on Connor's knee. The dog's warmth seeped through his jeans, grounding him. "You think grandfather was serious?" Connor murmured. "About the cabin holding something?" Axel's ears flicked forward. Connor scratched behind the dog's ears. "Yeah, me too." He looked around the apartment one last time. This place had never been home. Just a place to sleep between shifts, between nightmares, between the moments when the world felt too loud and too close. The cabin, though, he remembered it vaguely from childhood. A rough-hewn structure built against a cliff face, half buried in snow most of the year. His grandfather used to take him there for hunting trips. Back before the wars, both his grandfather's and his own had carved their marks into the Hayes men. It had been remote, isolated, the kind of place where you could hear yourself think, or the kind of place where you could disappear entirely. Connor stood, slinging the duffel over his shoulder. "Come on, Axel. Let's see what the old man left us." Axel trotted to the door, tail raised, ready. Connor locked the apartment for the last time, left the key on the counter, and walked out into the snow. The next morning, Connor's old Ford truck, rattling north on Highway 89 toward Frozen Ridge. The truck was a 1998 model. Rust orange and temperamental, but it ran. Barely. Connor had bought it for $800 3 years ago, and it had survived more breakdowns than he could count. The heater worked intermittently, The radio only picked up static, and the passenger side window didn't roll down anymore, but it moved. And that was enough. Axel sat in the passenger seat, head out the cracked window despite the cold, ears flapping in the wind. The dog's joy was infectious, and Connor found himself smiling despite everything. The landscape shifted as they drove north Billings, fading into rolling plains, then foothills. Then the jagged peaks of the northern Rockies rising like ancient sentinels. Snow clung to everything, turning the world into a study in white and shadow. Connor's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as the road narrowed. Winding through pine forests so dense they blocked out the sun. Ice patches glinted on the asphalt, and more than once the truck fishtailed before Connor corrected. 3 deployments, and I'm still scared of mountain roads, he thought bitterly. Axel glanced at him, then pressed closer, the dog's body warm against his arm. I know, Connor murmured. I'm okay. The GPS on his phone had stopped working an hour ago. No signal this deep in the mountains, but Connor remembered the way. Barely. Turn off at the old logging road. Follow it until the trees opened up. Look for the cliff face with the twisted pine. The sun was setting when he finally saw it, the cabin. Connor killed the engine and sat in silence, staring. It looked smaller than he remembered. Or maybe he'd just gotten bigger. The structure was built of dark wood, weathered to the color of charcoal, with a stone chimney rising from one side. The roof sagged slightly under the weight of snow, and the windows were dark, reflecting nothing, but it was still standing. Against all odds, it was still here. Axel jumped out of the truck before Connor could open the door, landing in snow up to his chest. The dog shook himself off and immediately began circling the cabin, nose to the ground, tail stiff. Connor followed, boots crunching through the snow. The cold bit at his face, sharp and clean, and for the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe. The front door was locked. Connor fished the key from his pocket, the one Finch had given him, and slid it into the old brass lock. It turned with a groan of protest, and the door swung inward. The smell hit him first. Dust, old wood, and something faintly metallic. The air was freezing colder inside than out, as if the cabin had been holding its breath for years. Connor stepped inside. Axel followed, moving cautiously, ears swiveling. The main room was small. A wood stove sat in the center, cold and covered in ash. A narrow cot lined one wall, the mattress stripped bare. Shelves held canned goods, their labels faded but still legible. A wooden table and 2 chairs sat near the window, and on the table, covered in a thin layer of dust, sat another envelope. Connor's heart thudded. He crossed the room and picked it up. His name again, in his grandfather's handwriting. Inside was a single sentence. The truth is below. Let Axel lead. Connor turned slowly, looking at Axel. The dog was standing near the wood stove, perfectly still, staring at the floor beneath it. And then Axel began to dig. That evening, inside the cabin, temperature dropping below freezing, Connor managed to get the wood stove working after clearing out years of ash and debris. The fire crackled weakly at first, then roared to life, filling the cabin with warmth that felt almost miraculous after hours in the cold. He'd unpacked his duffel, spread a sleeping bag on the cot, set up Axel's water bowl, and heated a can of soup over the stove. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd had in Billings. Axel lay near the stove, head resting on his paws, but his eyes were open, fixed on the spot he'd been digging earlier. Connor had stopped him after a few minutes, realizing the dog was scratching at something solid beneath the floorboards. Not dirt, not insulation, metal, but it was getting dark, and Connor was exhausted. Whatever was down there could wait until morning. He sat on the cot, sipping weak coffee from a battered thermos, and stared at the photograph he'd propped against the wall, the one of his platoon. 8 men. 4 of them dead now. 2 more barely functional. Connor and one other. A guy named Rodriguez, who'd moved to Alaska and stopped answering calls, were the only ones still trying to hold it together. Connor's hands trembled slightly. The tremor had started 6 months ago, right around the time he'd lost his job at the warehouse. PTSD, the VA doctor had said. Stress-induced. Axel stood and padded over, resting his head on Connor's knee. "I'm okay," Connor whispered, though his voice cracked. Axel didn't move, just stayed there, solid and warm and unshakable. Connor closed his eyes, letting the dog's presence pull him back from the edge. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, rattling the cabin's old bones. Snow piled against the windows, thick and relentless. And somewhere deep below the floorboards, something waited in the dark. The next morning, pale sunlight filtering through frost-covered windows. Connor woke to the sound of Axel's low, insistent whine, the kind that meant something's wrong, or pay attention. He sat up, disoriented. The sleeping bag tangled around his legs. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers, and the cabin was freezing again. Axel stood near the wood stove, pawing at the floorboards with focused intensity. Not frantic, deliberate. Connor rubbed his face, trying to shake off the fog of sleep. Axel barked once sharp, commanding. Connor pulled on his boots and crossed the room. He knelt beside the dog, running his hands over the floor. The boards here were different from the rest, newer, fitted more tightly together, and when he pressed down, they gave slightly, like they were resting on something hollow. His pulse quickened. He grabbed his utility knife from his pack and worked the blade into the seam between 2 boards. The wood groaned as he pried it up, revealing a hidden compartment about 2 feet deep. Inside was a metal box, rusted at the edges, but sealed tight. Connor lifted it out carefully, his hands shaking not from fear, but from adrenaline. Axel sat perfectly still, watching. Connor set the box on the table and studied it. No lock. Just a simple latch. Corroded, but functional. He flipped it open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were 3 things. A stack of letters, tied with twine. A leather journal. Cover, worn smooth. A yellowed map of the Frozen Ridge area, hand-drawn, with markings in red ink. Connor unfolded the map first. The cabin was marked clearly, along with the surrounding forest. But deeper into the ridge, near the base of the cliff, someone had drawn a series of interconnected circles and labeled them with numbers. Coordinates, Connor realized. Or depths. He opened the journal next. The handwriting was his grandfather's younger, steadier than the shaky script from recent years. The first entry was dated March 1971. They think I don't know what they're doing. But I know. I've always known. They're moving money through the ridge, dirty money, war money, money that should have gone to soldiers who needed it. Instead, it went into the pockets of men like Senator Calloway and his associates. I found the cash by accident. Was hunting elk when I saw the trucks. They didn't see me. I followed them to the cavern, saw what they were hiding. I took what I could. Not to steal, to protect. Because if this money stays buried under their control, it'll fund another war, another lie, another generation of men sent to die. I'm going to keep it safe. And when the time is right, I'll use it for good. Connor's chest tightened. His grandfather had been involved in something huge, something dangerous. He flipped through more entries, each one detailing how Colonel Hayes had systematically moved portions of the cash from the original hiding place to a new location. Somewhere deeper, somewhere safer. The final entry, dated November of last year, read, I'm running out of time. The cancer is winning. But I've done what I could. Connor will find this. He's the only one who deserves it. The only one who'll use it right. Let Axel lead. Dogs know truth better than men. Connor set the journal down, his throat tight. Axel nudged his hand with a cold nose, as if saying, "Keep going." Connor picked up the letters next. There were a dozen of them, all addressed to his grandfather from various sources. Other veterans, civilian contractors, even a few from government officials. One letter, dated 1972, was from someone named Thomas Reeve, a logistics officer, Colonel Hayes. "I'm writing to warn you. Calloway's people know someone's been watching them. They're tightening security around the ridge. If you're doing what I think you're doing, be careful. These men don't forgive. T.R." Connor's hands trembled. His grandfather had been running a covert operation for decades, right under the noses of corrupt officials. And now Connor was sitting on the evidence. He looked at Axel, who was staring at the floor again, not at the compartment they'd just opened, but at a spot a few feet away, near the wall. "There's more, isn't there?" Axel barked twice. "Yes." Connor moved to where the dog was focused and pressed on the floorboards. He tried prying with the knife. Nothing. Then Axel did something unexpected. The dog walked to the fireplace, picked up a loose stone with his teeth, and carried it back to Connor. Connor stared. "You've got to be kidding me." But when he pressed the stone against a specific knot in the wood, a hidden latch clicked. A section of the floor about 3 feet square dropped down an inch, revealing the edge of a trapdoor. Connor pulled it open. Below was a narrow shaft, descending into darkness. A rope ladder hung from iron hooks, disappearing into the black. And, from the depths, came a faint smell, cold, metallic, and unmistakable. Money. Mid-morning. Connor descended slowly, testing each rung of the rope ladder. Axel remained above, pacing anxiously, whining every few seconds. "Stay," Connor called up. "I'll be right back." The shaft was narrow, barely wide enough for Connor's shoulders, and the walls were rough stone, cold and damp. The ladder swayed with every movement, and Connor's pulse hammered in his ears. After about 20 feet, his boots touched solid ground. He pulled out his flashlight and flicked it on. The beam swept across a small cavern, maybe 10 feet wide, carved naturally from the rock. The air was frigid, and his breath fogged in thick clouds. And there, stacked against the far wall, were wooden crates. Connor approached cautiously, his flashlight shaking. The crates were old military issue, stamped with faded insignias. Some were labeled Quartermaster Corps, others Relief Fund. He pried open the nearest one. Inside, wrapped in plastic and cloth, were stacks of currency. Hundreds, thousands, 50s, all of it old, but perfectly preserved. Connor's breath caught. He opened another crate. More money. And another. Bearer bonds, sealed in protective sleeves. He opened a fourth crate and found something different. Gold bars, small but unmistakable, stamped with treasury marks. Connor stumbled back, his mind reeling. This wasn't just a stash. This was a fortune. He grabbed the journal from his pocket and flipped to the final pages, where his grandfather had written estimates. Total move to secondary cash. Approximately $270 million in cash, bonds, and bullion. Connor sat down hard on the cold stone floor, the flashlight beam trembling. $270 million? His grandfather had hidden a fortune beneath this cabin. Money that had been stolen from veterans, from relief programs, from men who'd needed it most. And Colonel Hayes had spent decades protecting it, waiting for the right person to find it. Connor's hands shook. He wanted to cry, to scream, to laugh hysterically. Instead, he heard Axel barking from above. Sharp, urgent, repeated. Connor scrambled to his feet. That was Axel's danger signal. He climbed the ladder as fast as he could, hauling himself back into the cabin just as Axel bolted to the window, growling low. Connor followed the dog's gaze. Outside, through the snow-heavy trees, headlights flickered. Someone was coming. Late morning. A black SUV pulling up outside the cabin. Connor's heart hammered as he closed the trapdoor and shoved the crate back over it. He grabbed Axel's collar, holding the dog back as the vehicle stopped about 50 yards from the cabin. The engine idled for a long moment. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive parka and leather gloves. Even from a distance, Connor recognized him. Marcus. Connor's blood went cold. Marcus walked toward the cabin with the casual confidence of someone who owned the place. Behind him, Vanessa emerged from the passenger side, shivering dramatically despite her fur-lined coat. "Connor!" Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the snow. Connor didn't move. Axel's growl deepened. "Come on, little brother. We need to talk." Connor finally opened the door, stepping onto the porch. Axel pushed past him, planting himself between Connor and Marcus, teeth bared. Marcus stopped walking, eyeing the dog warily. "Call him off." "He's fine," Connor said flatly. "What do you want?" Vanessa wrapped her arms around herself, glaring at the cabin. "This place is a dump, Connor. You can't seriously be staying here." "Didn't ask for your opinion." Marcus raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Look, we're not here to fight. We're here to help." "Help? Yeah?" Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We've been thinking. Grandfather left you this place, but let's be honest, you can't maintain it. You don't have the money, so we're willing to buy it from you. Fair price, enough to get you back on your feet." Connor's jaw clenched. "It's not for sale." "Connor, be reasonable." "I said, it's not for sale." Marcus's smile faded. "You're being stubborn. This place is worthless." "Then why do you want it?" Vanessa stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Because we're trying to help you." "You ungrateful." Axel lunged forward, barking once loud, sharp, final. Vanessa stumbled back with a shriek. Marcus's expression darkened. "Control your animal, Connor." "He's controlled." "You're trespassing. This is family property." "It's my property. Grandfather left it to me. You got everything else." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Fine. You want to freeze to death in this shack? Be my guest. But don't come crawling to us when you realize you've got nothing." He turned and stalked back to the SUV, Vanessa hurrying after him. Connor watched them drive away, his pulse still racing. When the sound of the engine faded, he looked down at Axel. "They know," he whispered. "They know there's something here." Axel's ears flattened. The dog sensed it too. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That afternoon. Connor drives into the nearest town. Elkwood, population 847. Elkwood was the kind of town that existed on old maps, but felt like it had been forgotten by time. A single main street lined with weathered storefronts, a general store, a diner, a post office, and a bar that doubled as the town's unofficial community center. Connor parked outside the Elkwood County Courthouse, a squat brick building that looked like it had been standing since Montana became a state. Axel followed him inside, ignoring the no pets sign on the door. Connor had learned long ago that service dogs went where they needed to go, and Axel's presence was non-negotiable. The interior smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. A woman sat behind a desk near the entrance, typing slowly on a computer that looked like it had survived Y2K by sheer stubbornness. She glanced up. "Help you? I need to see the county clerk." "Property records." She raised an eyebrow. "You're not from around here." "No, ma'am. But I own property on Frozen Ridge." "Inherited it." Her expression shifted recognition, maybe even respect. "You're Colonel Hayes's grandson." Connor blinked. "You knew him?" "Everyone knew the colonel." "Good man." She stood, gesturing toward a hallway. "Clerk's in the back. Name's Luther Moss." Tell him Dottie sent you." Connor nodded his thanks and headed down the hall, Axel at his heel. He found Luther Moss in a cramped office, surrounded by filing cabinets and stacks of dusty ledgers. The man was in his 70s, with a face like weathered leather and eyes sharp as tacks. "Dottie said you're Hayes's grandson." "Yes, sir." Connor Hayes. Luther looked him over, took in the worn jacket, the dog, the exhaustion carved into Connor's face. Then he nodded. "Sit." Connor sat. Axel lay at his feet, watchful. "What do you need?" "Information. About my grandfather's property. And about a man named Senator Calloway." Luther's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "That's a name I haven't heard in a while. You know who he was?" "Everyone in these parts does. Calloway ran half of Montana back in the day. Made a fortune off government contracts during Vietnam. Died about 10 years ago, but his family's still around." Connor leaned forward. "Did he have dealings on Frozen Ridge?" Luther was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to one of the filing cabinets, and pulled out a thick folder. "This is off the record," he said quietly. "Your grandfather came to me 20 years ago. Said he had evidence Calloway and his associates were using the ridge for illegal storage. Stolen relief funds, black market goods, you name it. He wanted me to help him document it. Did you?" "I did what I could." But Calloway had a long reach. People who asked too many questions tended to disappear. Your grandfather knew that. So he stopped asking questions and started acting. Luther slid the folder across the desk. "These are surveys, old mining records, land deeds. Calloway's name is all over them. He bought up parcels around the ridge through shell companies. No one knew why at the time." Connor opened the folder, scanning the documents. One name appeared repeatedly. Calloway Ventures, LLC. "Where's the family now?" "Calloway's son, Richard, runs the operation. Slick bastard. Lawyer. Lives in Missoula, but he's been sniffing around the ridge lately, buying up adjacent properties." Connor's blood ran cold. "Why?" "That," Luther said, "is what your grandfather wanted to know." That evening, back at the cabin, Connor reading his grandfather's journal by lamplight. The journal was a master class in patience and precision. Colonel Hayes hadn't just stumbled onto a conspiracy, he'd mapped it, documented it, and spent decades protecting the evidence. Connor read entry after entry, piecing together the story. In 1970, during the height of the Vietnam War, Congress had allocated billions for veteran relief programs, housing, medical care, education. But much of that money never reached the veterans. Instead, men like Senator Calloway and his associates funneled it through fake contractors, inflated invoices, and shell companies. The money was laundered, hidden, and used to line their pockets. Colonel Hayes, working in logistics at the time, had noticed discrepancies, shipments that never arrived, funds that disappeared. He started asking questions, and he started making enemies. By 1971, Hayes had discovered the Ridge Cache, a hidden storage site where Calloway's people stashed cash, bonds, and bullion skimmed from relief programs. The location was perfect, remote, difficult to access, and owned by Calloway under a false name. Hayes had been hunting when he saw the trucks. He followed them, saw what they were hiding, and he made a decision. Over the next several years, Hayes systematically moved portions of the cache to his own cabin. Enough to make a difference. The journal's final section detailed Hayes's plan. This money was stolen from men who served, men who bled, men who died. It belongs to them, to their families, to the veterans who come home broken and forgotten. When I'm gone, Connor will find it. He'll know what to do. He's a good man, better than I ever was. He'll make this right. Connor closed the journal, his chest aching. Axel rested his head on Connor's knee, sensing his distress. "He put all this on me?" Connor whispered. "What if I can't do it?" Axel's amber eyes didn't waver. The dog's faith was absolute. Connor exhaled slowly. "Okay? Okay." Scene 2. Secondary discoveries. The next morning, Connor explores the cavern more thoroughly. With Axel standing guard above, Connor descended into the cache again, this time bringing a better flashlight and a notebook. He catalogued everything. 47 crates of currency denominations ranging from $50 to $500 bills. 12 crates of bearer bonds, government and corporate. 8 crates of gold, bullion, small bars, easily transportable. 3 crates of documents, contracts, ledgers, correspondence. The documents were damning. Invoices for supplies that were never delivered. Payroll records for workers who didn't exist. Letters between Callaway and other officials discussing redistribution strategies. This wasn't just theft. It was systemic corruption on a massive scale. Connor photographed everything with his phone. Despite the lack of signal, he'd need proof when the time came. As he worked, he found something else tucked into one of the document crates, a letter addressed to him. His hands shook as he opened it. "Connor, if you're reading this, you've found it. Good. That means I chose right. This money doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to Callaway's people. It belongs to the men and women who served and got nothing in return. Use it. Build something that honors them. A place for veterans who need help. A refuge. A second chance. Don't let it sit in the dark like it did for Callaway. Make it mean something." "Grandfather." Connor sat back, the letter trembling in his hands. Axel barked from above, 3 sharp barks. "Danger." Connor shoved the letter into his pocket and climbed the ladder. When he emerged, Axel was at the window, growling low. Outside, a truck was parked at the edge of the clearing. Not Marcus's SUV, a different vehicle, larger, industrial, and 2 men in coveralls were walking toward the cabin, carrying equipment. Midday. Connor confronts the intruders. Connor stepped onto the porch, Axel at his side. The dog's fur bristled, teeth bared. The 2 men stopped walking. One was tall and thin, with a gaunt face and cold eyes. The other was shorter, stockier, with a shaved head and a scar running down his jaw. The tall one spoke first. "You Connor Hayes? Who's asking?" "We're with Callaway Land Management. We're here to conduct a geological survey." Connor's jaw clenched. "This is private property." "Actually," the man said, pulling out a folded document, "there's a county easement that allows us access for mineral surveys. We're within our rights." Connor didn't take the document. "I don't care what your paper says. You're not coming on my land," the shorter man smirked. "Tough guy." "Huh? You and your dog gonna stop us?" Axel lunged forward, barking ferociously. Both men stumbled back. The tall one raised his hands. "Easy. We're not looking for trouble." "Then leave." The man's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Hayes. This property sits on valuable land. You don't have the resources to fight us. Watch me." The 2 men exchanged a look. Then the tall one shrugged. "Your funeral." They walked back to their truck and drove off. Connor watched them go, his pulse racing. Axel paced the porch, still agitated. "They're not done," Connor muttered. "They're just getting started." That evening, Luther Moss calls Connor. Connor's phone buzzed rare this far out, but he'd found a spot near the window where he could sometimes get a signal. "Connor? It's Luther Moss." "Mr. Moss, what's wrong?" "Listen carefully. Richard Callaway filed a claim with the county this afternoon. He's alleging that portions of your property overlap with land his father purchased in 1968. He's demanding a resurvey." Connor's blood ran cold. "That's a lie." "Of course it is. But he's got lawyers, and he's got money. He can tie this up in court for years. What do I do? You need a lawyer. A good one. And you need to document everything. Property lines, deeds, your grandfather's records. If Calloway thinks there's something valuable on that land, he won't stop until he gets it. Connor looked at Axel, who was watching him intently. I'll handle it, Connor said quietly. Be careful, son. The Calloways play dirty. The line went dead. Connor set the phone down, his mind racing. Calloway knew, or suspected. Either way, the fight was coming, and Connor had $270 million worth of reasons to win. Late that night, Connor alone with his thoughts and his dog. Connor sat on the edge of the cot, head in his hands. The weight of everything. The cash, the conspiracy. The legal threats pressed down on him like a physical force. His hands were shaking again. The tremor that came when stress overloaded his system. Axel climbed onto the cot beside him, pressing his warm body against Connor's side. I don't know if I can do this, Connor whispered. I'm not strong enough. Images flashed through his mind. Afghanistan. The explosion. The screaming. The blood. His breathing quickened. Panic clawed at the edges of his vision. Axel pushed his head under Connor's hand, forcing him to focus. Connor grabbed the dog's fur, anchoring himself. Breathe, he told himself. Just breathe. Slowly, the panic receded. Axel's steady presence pulled him back. Connor looked into the dog's amber eyes. You think grandfather was right about me? Axel's tail thumped once against the cot. Connor exhaled shakily. Okay, we'll see this through. He pulled out the photograph of his platoon again. Looked at the faces of the men who hadn't made it home. They'd fought for something bigger than themselves, and they'd lost everything. This money, this fortune hidden beneath the cabin, it was meant for them. Connor wasn't going to let Calloway take it, not without a fight. 3 days later, morning, fresh snow covering the ridge. Axel had been acting strange all morning, pacing, whining, scratching at a spot near the back wall of the cabin that Connor had never paid much attention to. What is it, boy? The dog barked insistently, then began digging at the floorboards with focused intensity. Connor knelt beside him. The boards here were older than the ones hiding the trapdoor. Rougher. Original to the cabin. He pried them up carefully. Beneath was another compartment, smaller, shallower. Inside was a metal tin. Rusted, but sealed. Connor opened it. Inside were 3 things. A key, large, old-fashioned, made of brass. A photograph of his grandfather standing in front of a cliff face. A note in his grandfather's handwriting. The real cash is in the mountain. Follow the stone. Connor stared at the photograph. Behind his grandfather, carved faintly into the rock, was a symbol. He'd seen that symbol before. On the map, his pulse quickened. The $270 million beneath the cabin wasn't the real treasure. It was just the tip of the iceberg. Somewhere in the mountain behind the cabin was something bigger. Axel barked once, then trotted to the back door, waiting. Connor grabbed his gear, the key, and the photograph. All right, boy, show me. Midday. Deep in the forest behind the cabin. Axel led Connor through dense pines, following a trail only the dog could sense. Snow crunched underfoot, and the air was so cold it burned Connor's lungs. After 20 minutes, they reached the cliff face from the photograph. Connor stared up at it. The stone was dark basalt, shot through with veins of quartz. And there, about 10 feet up, barely visible beneath layers of ice and lichen, was the carved symbol. Connor's heart pounded. He searched the base of the cliff, looking for an entrance. Nothing obvious. Just solid rock. Then Axel began digging at a specific spot, uncovering a metal plate hidden beneath snow and debris. Connor brushed it clean. It was a hatch, heavy, sealed with a lock. The key from the tin Fit perfectly. Connor turned it. The lock clicked open. He pulled the hatch up, revealing a narrow passage descending into the mountain. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of stone and metal. Connor looked at Axel. Axel's tail wagged once. Connor descended. The passage was steep, carved roughly from the rock. He used his flashlight to navigate, his breath echoing in the confined space. After about 50 feet, the passage opened into a massive cavern. Connor's flashlight beam swept across the space, and he froze. The cavern was filled with crates, not dozens, hundreds, stacked floor to ceiling, labeled with military insignias, government stamps, corporate logos. Connor approached the nearest one and pried it open. Inside, more currency. He opened another. Documents, contracts, invoices, ledgers. Another. Weapons, old rifles, still wrapped in protective coating. Another. Medical supplies, morphine, antibiotics, bandages, all of it stolen, all of it hidden. Connor stumbled back, his mind reeling. This wasn't just a fortune. This was an archive of corruption spanning decades. And at the center of the cavern, on a makeshift table, sat a final journal. Connor opened it with trembling hands. The first page read, "This is the full accounting. Every dollar stolen, every life it cost, every man who died because the money meant to save him went into the pockets of senators and contractors. I couldn't expose it while I was alive. They would have killed me, killed my family. But now it's yours, Connor. Use it. Burn their legacy to the ground." Connor's throat tightened. Axel barked from the entrance, sharp, urgent. Connor spun around. Footsteps echoed down the passage. Multiple people. And then Richard Calloway's voice rang out, smooth and cold. "Well, well." "The cavern!" Connor surrounded. Richard Calloway stepped into the cavern, flanked by 4 men, the same 2 from before, plus 2 others carrying guns. Calloway was in his 50s, tall and impeccably dressed even in the wilderness. His hair was silver, his eyes sharp as broken glass. "Connor Hayes," he said, smiling. Connor's jaw clenched. Axel growled, positioning himself between Connor and the intruders. "This is private property," Connor said evenly. "Actually," Calloway replied, "it's contested property, and I have a legal claim to everything in this mountain." "That's a lie." "Is it?" Calloway gestured to the crates. "This cash was assembled by my father. He stored it here. That makes it his. Your father stole it." Calloway's smile didn't waver. "Prove it." Connor's hands clenched into fists. "I have proof. My grandfather documented everything. Your grandfather was a thief. He took what didn't belong to him. He took what your father stole from veterans." Calloway's expression hardened. "Semantics. The fact is, you're sitting on my property, surrounded by my men, holding assets that legally belong to me." One of the armed men stepped forward, raising his rifle slightly. Axel snarled, teeth bared. "Call off your dog," Calloway said quietly, "or my men will shoot him." Connor's blood ran cold. "You wouldn't. Try me." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Axel did something Connor had never seen him do before. The dog lunged not at the men, but at one of the crates. He knocked it over, spilling documents across the floor. Then he grabbed a specific page in his teeth and bolted toward the passage. "Stop him!" Calloway shouted. But Axel was already gone, disappearing into the darkness. Connor used the distraction. He grabbed the journal from the table and ran. Gunfire echoed behind him. Bullets ricocheted off stone. Connor dove into the passage, scrambling upward as fast as he could. Behind him, Calloway's voice echoed, "Find that dog. And bring me Hayes." Alive. Outside the cavern, Connor running through the forest. Connor burst out of the passage, gasping for air. Snow blinded him, and the forest seemed to spin. Axel appeared beside him, the document still clamped in his jaws. "Good boy," Connor panted. "Good boy." They ran. Behind them, shouts echoed. Engines roared to life. Connor's lungs burned. His legs screamed. But he didn't stop. Axel led him through the trees, taking paths only the dog could navigate. After what felt like hours, they reached the cabin. Connor grabbed his phone, praying for signal. 1 bar. He dialed Luther Moss. "Luther, it's Connor. I need help. Calloway's people are after me. They know about the cash." "Where are you?" "At the cabin. But I don't know how long." Headlights cut through the trees. "They're here," Connor whispered. "Hold on. I'm calling the sheriff." The line went dead. Connor looked at Axel. "We're not done yet." He grabbed the journal, the documents Axel had retrieved, and his grandfather's letters. Then he did the only thing he could think of. He set the cabin on fire. Not to destroy the cash below that was safe, sealed beneath stone, but to create a diversion. As flames climbed the old wood, Connor and Axel disappeared into the forest. Behind them, Calloway's men arrived too late to stop the fire, too late to catch their prey. And in Connor's pocket, the journal burned with truth. That night, Sheriff's Station in Elkwood. Connor sat in the station, wrapped in a blanket, Axel at his feet. The dog was exhausted, but alert. Sheriff Dale Merrick, a man in his 60s with a weathered face and kind eyes, set a mug of coffee in front of Connor. "You're safe now." Connor nodded numbly. Luther Moss stood nearby, arms crossed. "I've already contacted the state police. They're sending investigators to the ridge." "And Calloway?" "In custody," Merrick said. "We found him and his men at the site. They had weapons, trespassing on your land, threatening you. That's enough to hold them while we sort this out." Connor exhaled slowly. Luther leaned forward. "That's where things get interesting. The documents you and Axel recovered? They're smoking guns. Proof of your grandfather's claims. Proof of what Calloway's father did. Will it be enough?" "More than enough. This is going to blow wide open." Connor looked down at Axel, who was resting his head on Connor's boot. "He saved my life," Connor whispered. "Again." Merrick smiled faintly. "That dog's a hero." Axel's tail thumped once. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the ridge in white. But for the first time in days, Connor felt like he could breathe. 2 weeks later, County Courthouse. Packed courtroom. The hearing had drawn more attention than Elkwood had seen in decades. Reporters lined the walls. Veterans filled the gallery. And at the center of it all sat Connor Hayes, with Axel lying calmly at his feet. Across the aisle, Richard Calloway sat stiff and silent, flanked by expensive lawyers who looked increasingly uncomfortable. The presiding judge, Evelyn Cartwright, a stern woman in her 70s, banged her gavel. "Order." Luther Moss stood, presenting the case with the precision of someone who'd been waiting decades for this moment. He laid out everything. Senator Calloway's theft of relief funds in the 1,970 seconds. The Ridge cash. Colonel Hayes's covert operation to protect the stolen money, and Richard Calloway's recent attempts to claim it illegally. Connor testified, his voice steady, despite the tremor in his hands. He described finding the cash, the documents, his grandfather's journals, and then he presented the most damning evidence, the page Axel had retrieved. It was a ledger, signed by Senator Calloway himself, detailing the diversion of $400 million in veteran relief funds. The courtroom erupted. Judge Cartwright slammed her gavel repeatedly. "Order! I will clear this courtroom." When silence finally returned, she turned to Richard Calloway. "Mr. Calloway, do you have anything to say?" Calloway's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client." "I'm asking your client." Calloway remained silent, his face pale. Judge Cartwright's expression was ice. This court finds that the Calloway family has no legal claim to the Ridge property or its contents. All assets recovered are to be placed in a federal trust, pending investigation into their origins. She turned to Connor. Mr. Hayes, given your grandfather's documented efforts to protect these assets for their intended purpose, veteran relief, this court recommends that you be appointed trustee of the recovered funds. Connor's throat tightened. Your Honor, I don't know if I'm qualified. Your grandfather thought you were. That's enough for me. The gallery erupted in applause. Axel stood, tail wagging, as if he understood what had just happened. That evening, Connor and Luther at a diner in Elkwood. Connor sat across from Luther, nursing a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. You okay? Luther asked. I don't know what to do with it, Connor admitted. It's too much, too big. Your grandfather knew you'd feel that way. That's why he left you this. Luther slid a final envelope across the table. Connor opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Connor, by now, you know the truth. You've seen what men are capable of, the worst and the best. Don't keep this money. Don't hide it. Use it. Build something that helps veterans come home, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. A place where they can heal, where they're not forgotten. You know what it's like to come back broken. You know what it's like to need help and have no one offer it. Be the person you needed when you came home. Grandfather. Connor set the letter down, tears burning his eyes. Luther said quietly, he believed in you, son. Connor looked at Axel, who was resting peacefully under the table. I know what I need to do, Connor said. 6 months later, Frozen Ridge, spring thaw. The cabin was gone, burned to ash. The Hayes Veterans Refuge. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't flashy. But it was solid, warm, and built with care. The main building, a long, low structure made of timber and stone, housed sleeping quarters, a dining hall, a therapy center, and a K-9 training facility. Behind it, the forest had been cleared to make space for walking trails, meditation gardens, and a memorial wall inscribed with the names of veterans who'd been failed by the system Colonel Hayes had fought against. Connor stood on the porch, watching as the first group of residents arrived, veterans from across Montana. Some with service dogs, some alone, all carrying the weight of wars that never really ended. Axel sat beside him, older now, graying around the muzzle, but still strong. A woman approached Dr. Sarah Lynn, the refuge's lead therapist. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. They're settling in well, she said. You did good, Connor. Couldn't have done it without help. Luther Moss walked up, smiling. Place looks good. Thanks to you, Connor said. Luther shrugged. Your grandfather started this. You finished it. Connor looked out at the ridge, the mountains rising in the distance, snow melting into rivers that fed the valley below. He'd be proud, Luther added quietly. Connor nodded, his throat tight. That evening, Connor alone with Axel in his small cabin on the refuge grounds. Connor sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and orange. Axel lay beside him, head resting on his paws. We did it, boy, Connor murmured. We actually did it. Axel's tail thumped lazily. Connor's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. I heard about the refuge. Grandfather would have been proud. I was wrong about you. Connor stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed back, thanks. He didn't need Marcus's approval, but it felt good to receive it anyway. Another message came in, this time from one of the refuge's residents, a young Marine who'd lost both legs in Iraq. Thank you for this place. I didn't think I'd ever feel safe again. Connor's eyes burned with tears. Axel nudged his hand gently. Yeah, Connor whispered. The nightmares hadn't stopped entirely. The PTSD still flared up, but for the first time since Afghanistan, Connor felt like his life had purpose. And that was enough. Spring. The Hayes Veterans Refuge, thriving. The refuge had grown. A second building had been added, a vocational training center, where veterans learned carpentry, mechanics, and other trades. The K-9 program had paired 20 dogs with veterans who needed them, and the memorial wall now held over 300 names. Veterans whose families had reached out, wanting their loved ones remembered. Connor stood at the wall, running his fingers over the engraved letters. His grandfather's name was there, along with the men from Connor's platoon who hadn't made it home. Axel stood beside him. Older now, moving slower, but still loyal. A young boy approached, maybe 7 or 8, holding his mother's hand. The mother was a widow. Her husband, killed in Syria. "Are you Mr. Hayes?" the boy asked. Connor knelt. "I am. My mom says you built this place for people like my dad." Connor's throat tightened. "I did. Thank you." Connor nodded, unable to speak. The boy looked at Axel. "Is that your dog?" "He is." "He's a hero, right?" Connor smiled. "The biggest hero I know." Axel's tail wagged, and the boy giggled. As the family walked away, Luther approached, hands in his pockets. "Senator's committee reached out," he said. "They want to use your grandfather's documents to investigate other cases of stolen relief funds. Could be dozens more like this." Connor nodded. "Good. They also want to name a bill after Colonel Hayes, the Veterans Relief Accountability Act." Connor's chest ached. He'd like that. Luther smiled. "You've done more than honor his legacy, Connor. You've built something that'll outlast all of us." Connor looked out at the refuge, at the veterans walking the trails, the dogs playing in the yard, the sun setting over the mountains. "I just did what needed to be done," he said quietly. "That's all any of us can do." As the stars began to appear, Connor and Axel walked back to their cabin. The dog's steps were slower now, but his spirit was unbroken. Connor opened the door, and Axel padded inside, curling up on his favorite rug by the fireplace. Connor sat beside him, running his hand over the dog's graying fur. "We made it, buddy," he whispered. "We really made it." Axel's eyes closed, his breathing slow and content. And for the first time in years, Connor Hayes felt at peace. The Hayes Veterans Refuge still stands today, helping hundreds of veterans find their way home, not to a place, but to themselves. Connor Hayes never sought fame. He never wanted recognition. He just wanted to honor the man who believed in him when no one else did. And Axel, the dog who found a fortune beneath the snow, lived to the age of 13, passing peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by the people and place he'd helped build. Sometimes the greatest treasures aren't gold or money. Sometimes they're loyalty, purpose, and the courage to do what's right when the world says you can't. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, you're stronger than you think. Just like Connor, just like Axel, just like the veterans who keep fighting long after the war is over. Subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances.